Chapter 1. Pulling his pickup truck into a parking spot at the edge of the lot, Ford inhaled deeply as he looked at the majestic brick building which had stood longer than any other building in Leonard Station. A tornado had swept through town 12 years ago and wiped out most of the town. Few buildings were left fully standing, the courthouse being one of them. Others were partially destroyed and now had new additions added on to the formerly standing walls, so the courthouse was revered in a special way as indestructible. Today, he only hoped it ended this black chapter in his life. Spotting his sister, Emmy Lou, and his brother, Dawson, waiting for him at the top of the steps in front of the entrance, he pulled his keys from the ignition and exited his truck. Swallowing the lump in his throat as he neared them, the somber looks on their faces told his story. They were scared, worried, and sick to have to be here today, but eager to get on with life. Their new life. His boots made soft thumping sounds as he ascended the steps to greet his siblings. The sun beat down, already creating a bead of sweat on his temple, and he could feel moisture gather at his back. Another scorcher today. He hugged Emmy first. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail at her nape. Her dark eyes, so much like his, held the emotions of 100 people in them. He wrapped his arms around her tighter and pulled her closer, whispering in her ear, "We'll be okay. We can do this."
"I know. I'm not used to being on this side of the courtroom, and I'm nervous as hell."
"About time you see what some of your clients have to go through. It'll make you a better lawyer for them." She scoffed and slapped at his shoulder, but the weak smile she gave him said it all. She thought so too. She was a damned good lawyer, though she often found herself working for the worst clients. Drug dealers and pedophiles. As a defense lawyer, she got them all, but she always believed a fair trial kept these scumbags from getting an appeal and kept them in jail where they belonged. Good thing they didn't know she felt that way. Turning to Dawson, Ford wrapped him in a warm embrace. "Love you, man. It's going to be all right."
"I know, Ford. We're finally going to see this piece of shit go to jail for killing Mom and Dad.
I haven't been able to sleep, thinking we'd finally be getting justice for them. It's all I've been able to think about for the past 4 years.
Yeah, I get that."
Dawson, the youngest of the three of them and the most emotional, blinked away the wetness gathering in his eyes. Dawson's sandy brown hair and blue eyes were just like their mom's, and Ford had to swallow the lump that had grown in his throat at the thought. Their parents had been killed in a fire set by Bobby Ray June just over 4 years ago. He'd been tracking Bobby Ray ever since. Then, Bobby Ray was a suspect in the fires that burned through Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and Ford had been so damned mad that he hadn't gotten to him. He stepped up his efforts, which required him to be away from home for 5 months, and finally brought him in 8 months ago. Getting to this trial had seemed like an eternity, and his heart was heavy that he hadn't been able to get justice for his parents. That is, until now. Finally. Stepping back, he inhaled deeply and asked, "Shall we head inside?" They turned to enter the old brick building, the sun still high in the sky. The cloudless day seemed a good omen for them.
"Ford, hey, wait up!"
He turned to see Detective Rory Richards briskly walking toward them. Leaning forward to shake hands with his high school friend, Ford could see the trouble in his eyes. "Hey, hate to be the one to tell you this, that I'm so sorry." He cleared his throat. "Bobby Ray June escaped as he was being transported to court this morning."
"What?"
Emmy yelled.
"Honest to God, didn't you have that animal chained up in every way possible?"
Tears instantly raced down her cheeks as she looked to Ford for their next move. His jaw clenched, and his heart dropped to the bottom of his stomach, threatening to spill the meager contents inside. "They had help. We're thinking Waylon June." Rory's fingers shook as he handed the grainy pictures to him. "We'd like you on this, Ford, if you think you want to track this asshole down again." It was hard to make out distinct features, but the resemblance was certainly the mark of family. Sliding each picture off to Emmy and Dawson as he looked them over, the last one was a gut punch. Both Bobby Ray and Waylon giving the camera on the prison escort van the finger and wearing smiles on their disgusting, pudgy faces. Emmy gasped as she saw the last picture. Dawson swore and choked back a sob. Emmy grabbed Ford's arm and turned him toward her.
You have to go. You have to go and get that motherfucker again.
Chapter 2. "Good morning," she cheerfully said to no one in particular, but to all who were within earshot. "Morning, Megan. I've got your breakfast all ready. It's chicken day, so you're gonna be busy. Need to eat to build up your strength." Nyla's deep, gravelly voice could be heard over the clatter of dishes and frying foods. A large woman in her early 60s, Nyla had hired Megan when she needed a job, and they'd been together for the past 4 years. Everyone in town loved Nyla's roasted chicken and her apple pies. Megan loved that Nyla took care of her, and she returned the favor. It wasn't uncommon for Nyla to forget to eat herself, especially on chicken day. "Thank you. I'll just do a quick sweep of the dining room with the coffee pot before I sit." Tying her spring green apron around her waist, she breezed through the double-swinging saloon doors to the dining room and quickly assessed the capacity. About half full now. It wouldn't be long before it would be impossible to hear herself think as it filled with customers, all chatting, laughing, and enjoying the atmosphere. Small town meets southern charm, meets the best deal in town, and the best food, too. It was a business goldmine. "Morning, Ralph, Ed. More coffee?" She filled their cups without waiting for them to respond. They always wanted more coffee. Regulars came in at 6 a.m. and sat through the better part of breakfast, gossiping about who was where and when they came and went. Gossip Central right here. Edging her way through the tables set for 4, the red and white upholstered chairs and shiny vinyl and chrome legs resembled a 50s diner. She continued chatting and pouring until she came to a booth in the corner. Stopping short of the table, her stomach plummeted as her eyes caught those of the occupant. Laser blue eyes trapped her, causing her throat to go dry as her heart sped. Not again. This was the 5th day in a row. Why wouldn't he believe her and go harass someone else? "Marcus, I don't suppose I could hope that you're actually here for the food today." Slowly pushing his cup to the edge of the table, she gritted her teeth as she concentrated on filling it, but fantasized about dumping the whole pot over his head. "I think we both know why I'm here." Lifting her eyes to his, she slowly inhaled and held her breath for a moment before exhaling. "I don't know where Waylon is. We're divorced. Have been for over 6 damned years. He doesn't check in. He doesn't call. He doesn't write. He doesn't visit. And I like it that way. I want nothing to do with him or you or any of your cohorts. Now, if I need to call the police about the harassment, I certainly will." A smile spread across his face in a slow slither, as if he were a snake, which was the perfect way to describe him. He was a drug runner, and unfortunately for her, so was Waylon. Also, unfortunately for her, Waylon seemed to have stolen a very valuable something from Marcus, and he wanted it back. "I think you're blowing this all out of proportion. I'm sitting here drinking coffee, not unlike those gentlemen over there you chatted so nicely with, and I simply ask you a couple of questions about a mutual friend. Don't think the cops are going to be too interested in that story." She clenched her jaw tightly as her breathing increased. "Plus, with your record, I don't think the police are going to believe you over me. I don't have a police record. Yet," she spat out. He shrugged. Turning abruptly, she hustled back to the kitchen, more to get away from him than anything else, but also, well, to get away from him. Ramming her fists into her apron pockets to hide the shaking from Nyla, she walked past the table set with her plate and a fresh glass of orange juice, intending to use the restroom. "Hey, girl, you need to eat," Nyla called after her. Giving a quick wave of her hand and a glance over her shoulders, she replied, "Just gotta use the bathroom. Be back." Locking the wooden door behind her, she leaned against it, wrapping her hands around her stomach, hoping to quell the roiling. He was right in that he didn't actually do anything to her other than ask questions. But she knew for a fact that he'd followed her home yesterday, and the day before. He watched her house most of the night, too. She'd gone onto her front porch to water all of her flowers, and there he was, not even hiding the fact that he was watching her. In the middle of the night, she could have sworn she heard footsteps on the porch. Her heart beat so fast, she thought it'd take off and fly away. Listening for the jiggle of the door handle or the rattle of one of her old windows, she was finally able to relax after about an hour when no such sounds reached her ears. She didn't mention it today because she wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, and he wasn't getting bolder. She was probably being stupid. These weren't people you messed with. If she knew where that jackass ex-husband of hers was, she'd turn him over in a heartbeat. "Megan, honey, time to get rolling. You okay in there?" Nyla knocked softly. "Yes, I'll be right out, Nyla." Washing her hands, she breathed in and out a couple times and told herself it would all be all right. Leaving the bathroom, she smoothed down her apron, shoulders back, head high, and forced herself to be brave. Then she heard Chad, the busboy, say, "Huh, never seen that guy before."
Chapter 3. Shuffling through the pictures once more, Ford stopped on the picture of Megan. Waylon June's ex-wife was a pretty little thing. Green eyes that sparkled at the camera and thick auburn hair, trailing to just past her shoulder blades, was a stunning combination. Her sweet, perfect smile and smattering of light freckles across her nose spoke of innocence and purity. But you aren't married to a drug dealer and remain pure. Those two things don't go together. And she had an arrest on her record. He looked up and saw the sign above where she worked, the Log Cabin Restaurant. He shook his head and muttered, "Why in the hell would you work in a restaurant, Megan?" He glanced through her dossier again. 4 years of nursing school, worked in the field in a hospital for 2 years, a nursing home for 10, then abruptly quit and began working at the log cabin as a waitress. What would make a single woman give up a career where she made good money to sling hash in a little place like that? If her ex was any indicator, she was trouble or looking for it. Entering the diner, the bell above the door called out his entrance. A red-haired waitress behind the counter glanced his way and smiled.
"Take a seat anywhere you like. One of us will be around with coffee in a minute."
He nodded and glanced to the right. A couple of empty tables sat toward the middle of the dining room and one empty booth toward the window. The booth called his name, so he strode over, slid on the vinyl seat to the middle, and picked up the menu. The smell of bacon and fresh apple pie floated in the air to his nose. He swallowed the lump that formed in his throat. His mom made the best apple pie he'd ever eaten. He loved the spices and cinnamon in her pies, and she always added an extra dash of it for him. He hadn't had apple pie since she died. It was these little things that caught him off guard. Emmy and Dawson, too. They spoke about it every so often, each of them with their own apple pie story. Glancing around the room and taking in the occupants, he noticed a single gentleman sitting in the corner opposite him and realized he was assessing the room as well. He was by himself in a booth, no food in front of him, just coffee. Megan walked out of the kitchen, swung past the coffee maker, and began filling the customers' cups. He watched her move, graceful and casual as she gave each patron a bit of attention and a nice smile. She stopped at his table and he heard her intake of breath when he looked into her eyes. Eyes that, by the way, the picture in his truck did not do justice. Green like a spring day, deep around the outside of the iris, lighter green toward the pupil and hypnotizing. Full lashes framed the green jewels, and he could see she barely wore makeup. Clear skin, faint freckles dusted her nose, and her full, sensual lips held just a touch of gloss. I'll be damned.
"Care for coffee?"
she chirped. It took him a moment to respond, his mind lagging behind and thinking other thoughts. Clearing his throat, he responded, "Yes, please." He turned the cup over that sat on the matching saucer at his place setting and slid it to the edge of the table. He watched as she poured, her arm lifting just enough for him to see the outline of her breast, hidden behind her light green apron. It was easy to see what Waylon saw in her, but what the hell did she see in Waylon? That man was pudgy, unkempt, and a drug dealer. Made no sense.
Have you had the chance to look at the menu? Special today's chicken if you want to forego breakfast and slide into lunch. Otherwise, we have all the usuals. Eggs, bacon, sausage, pancakes, French toast, and my favorite, Eggs Benedict.
Thanks. I'll have 2 eggs over easy and whole wheat toast. Then, if you'd be so kind, I'd like to know where your ex-husband is. She stepped back and he saw her jaw tighten. She practically hissed.
Is this what you two are doing now? You'll keep sending in more and more of you until you're satisfied that I'm not lying?
Us two? She jerked her head toward the opposite side of the room.
You and Marcus. He's been hounding me all damned week. I'll tell you what I told him, several times.
She leaned in, lasered her eyes to his, and continued.
I don't know where that useless piece of shit is, and I don't care. I haven't spoken to him in about 5 years. I don't even have a phone number. And again, I don't want it. If you want your precious item back, go find him. He doesn't come to me, and he won't, and I sure as hell have no intention of going to him since I don't know where he is.
She finger-jabbed the table as she said each syllable, as if it made her point clearer. She straightened her spine and tossed her head in Marcus's direction. Slowly shaking her head back and forth as if to scold him, she turned to him again.
Now, any other way I can make myself clear?
He straightened his spine, glanced over at Marcus, and then looked into her eyes. I don't know, Marcus. I also don't know about any precious item. What I do know, he leaned toward her, set his jaw, and locked eyes with her, is Waylon helped Bobby Ray June escape from the prison transport van on the way to his trial for killing 2 people in a fire. I want Waylon and Bobby Ray. He finger-jabbed the table just as she had previously to emphasize his point. Gasping, her free hand flew to her mouth, her eyes closed, and she swallowed. Opening her eyes, she softly asked,
Bobby Ray killed someone?
Yes.
Oh, God.
She made her way to the kitchen, her stomach twisted, and she thought she'd lose the little bit of Eggs Benedict Nyla had made for her. Bobby Ray always was a piece of crap. She hated it when he came around. He leered at her and creeped her out. She complained to Waylon about it, and he told her to pull up her big girl panties. Toward the end of their marriage, whenever Bobby Ray would come by, she'd disappear to the grocery store or her best friend Jolie's house. She knew he was dangerous and not mentally sound, but she had no idea he was capable of murder. She tucked her order slip for the gorgeous but probably dangerous man in the booth by the window, beneath the spring on Nyla's order wheel. "Order for table 8 is up, Megan," Nyla called out when she saw her approach. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the 2 plates and carried them to the nice couple, asking if they needed a coffee refill. Keeping herself busy wasn't a problem as the restaurant filled up. "Order up for table 17. Squaring her shoulders, she picked up the 2 eggs over easy and whole wheat toast, grabbed the coffee pot, and headed to the table of the man who both excited and scared her. He was a broody sort. His darker-than-dark eyes were both mesmerizing and scary. They were so dark, it was hard to tell where the iris and pupil met. His strong jaw held a hint of whiskers, as if he'd shaved hours ago. The dark shadow gave him a mysterious presence, which she bet he loved. She hadn't seen him walk in, but the length of his legs under the table and of his arms on top told her he was tall. From the side, she could see he was fit and firm. nice. But no, she was steering clear. Here you go. Sliding his plate in front of him, she lay his silverware wrapped in a napkin alongside his plate. Coffee? Proud that she was keeping her voice even, she poured when he nodded. Then she watched as his eyes caught movement behind her and his back stiffened. She could feel the heat at her back before she heard Marcus whisper in her ear, "I'm watching you, Megan. You may as well make contact with that jerk you were married to before things get very ugly for you." Before she could respond, he was gone. Setting the coffee pot on the table before she dropped it, she clasped her hands together in front of her to quell the shaking. He was getting bolder. Looking up slightly to see what her mysterious man was doing, her heartbeat hitched. Those dark black eyes bored into hers, but this time they held something else. Sympathy? Caring? Probably not, but he didn't look as menacing as he had before. "Looks like Marcus there is getting bold." "You don't know the half of it." "Why don't you tell me?" She picked up the coffee pot and stepped back. "I don't even know you. Why would I share that kind of thing with a stranger?" "My name is Ford Montgomery, and I'm here for the same reason Marcus is, to find Waylon. But not for the same reasons. I was hired by the Kane County Police Department to bring him and Bobby Ray in. Looks like we could be friends and help each other out." Biting her bottom lip, she thought about it. Actually thought about it. His low, sexy voice washed over her in a soothing way, and she'd bet her next 10 checks he'd lured women of all kinds in with those looks and that Sam Elliott voice of his. But it was too easy to rely on him and too convenient. It would be nice, though, to have someone to turn to. "Thanks, Ford, for the offer. But I don't think so." Chapter 4. Chicken Day flew right by, but man, oh man, she was dog-ass tired. Pulling her sweet little white Jeep Wrangler into her garage, she climbed out and pulled the garage door down behind her. With Marcus and Ford lurking around, she'd need to start closing that door when she left in the morning. It was the first time in all years she'd lived here that she felt like she had to close the damned garage door. Fucking Waylon and his son-of-a-bitch cousin Bobby fucking Ray. Walking to the end of the driveway, she pulled her mail from the mailbox, sifted through the 2 ads for crafts at the local mall in Harper Valley, around 35 miles away, the electric bill, and her favorite country living magazine as she walked to the house. Stopping at the bottom step of her porch, she took a moment to admire her little house. It had been her grandmother's house first, but she was mostly raised here after her dad took off and her mom died. She was 12 then. Her brother, Cord, and her sister Delaney were 6 and 4 years older than her, respectively. Cord left home and got a job on an offshore rig the week after he turned 18, and Delaney spent most of her time at her boyfriend's house. Though it didn't take him long to dump her when he met the newest blonde with the big breasts in town. Cad. She painted the wraparound porch white this summer, and even though it took her the better part of a week to get the whole thing painted, it looked fabulous with its gleaming white spindles and floor. Her brightly colored flower pots and flowers added that homey touch she loved. It looked like one of the pictures she often saw in her country magazine. She should submit a picture of it. Maybe she would when she painted the house yellow this summer. Then the whole look would be complete. Entering her clean, fresh living room, she took a deep breath and released it. Home. She placed her magazine on the coffee table with her other magazines, neatly fanning them out to see the titles. She smiled as she walked across the room to her bedroom. Setting her purse on the floor in the closet, she kicked off her shoes. That felt heavenly. She pulled the hairband from her ponytail. Scrubbing her head with her fingers to ease the tension from the band and the day, she began to let herself relax. Making her way back to the coffee table, she picked up the ads and the water bill when she heard a tapping that sounded like something dropping in the kitchen. Her brows furrowed as she listened again, and this time the tapping grew louder. Walking toward the kitchen door, She could smell something. Gas, maybe? But before she could get through the door, there was an explosion. Waking, she opened her eyes, but couldn't see anything. Smoke filled her lungs, and she began coughing. Realization finally sank in, and she felt around her to get her bearings. She was on the living room floor, the coffee table to her right. The roar and crackle finally met her ears, and the direness of the situation wrapped around her, and fear seized her movement. Her heartbeat raced. As the heat rose in the room, her self-preservation mechanism finally clicked in. She rolled onto her stomach, but coughing threatened to make her pass out. Pulling the neckline of her t-shirt up over her nose and mouth, she found relief, but just a bit. Crawling in the direction she thought led to the front door, relief swept through her when she felt it within reach. Rising up on her knees, she twisted the handle and found it locked. Panicking, she tried over and over to twist the handle and find the lock. The heat was increasing, and the orange of the flames began to poke through the gray, smoke-filled room. "Help!" she yelled out, but began coughing again. Hitting her fists against the door, she tried again. "Help!" "Megan, unlock the door." Frozen in fear at the voice on the other side, she shook her head. But help was help, and she needed it.
Chapter 5. From his truck 2 doors down, he watched Megan close her garage door, rubbing her back as she made her way to her mailbox. He'd watched the diner most of the day and assumed she'd run her little legs off, figuring the whole of South Pass must have come through the doors of the log cabin at least once. The food was fantastic, and many left with styrofoam boxes filled with all they couldn't eat. He watched as she admired the front of her house and then stepped inside. Settling back into the seat of his truck, he logged onto his laptop and checked his email while often glancing toward her house. If he was lucky, Waylon would show up looking for help from Megan, and he could nab him and save her from Marcus at the same time. Not that she'd asked. But he could tell she was afraid of Marcus, and if he was honest, that was another reason he was sitting here now. It went against his grain to see a woman in need and not help her, and he'd bet his whole paycheck that she needed help. An explosion sounded, and when he looked up, he saw smoke coming from the back of Megan's house. Quickly jumping from his truck, he ran across the street. He could hear her coughing and trying to twist the door handle. "Megan, unlock the door."
"It's stuck. I can't."
He heard her fall into a fit of coughing and looked around the porch for something to throw through the front window. Seeing a pot filled with colorful flowers, he shook his head and picked it up. "Back away from the window," he yelled through the door. He hefted the large pot to shoulder height and tossed it through the window. He heard her gasp, but didn't stop to wait. Using his boot, he swiped the broken glass from the bottom and sides of the window as much as he could and folded himself through it. Running his hand along the wall, he held his t-shirt over his nose and mouth with the other, inching his foot in front of him so he didn't step on her. "Megan, where are you? We need to get out of here." He tried keeping the fear from his voice, but felt he was losing that battle. Coughing sounded next to him, and he reached down with both hands and found her shoulders. He scooped her up and slid along the wall to the window. The smoke was so thick it was impossible to see anything but the bit of light streaming through where he'd just come in and the orange flames racing toward them. Bending down, he threw one long leg through the window, ducked a bit farther, and stepped out onto the porch. But he didn't stop until they were at the edge of the yard. Sirens wailed in the distance as he laid her on the grass, her coughing still heavy, but her lungs would hopefully clear soon. Smoothing her hair away from her face, his heart hurt for her. This woman had been through a lot this week, probably her whole life, but this week he knew for sure had been stressful, if Marcus's comments were any indicator. Her coughing subsided as the fire trucks pulled up. "Sir, you're going to need to get out of the way. We need you over by that pickup truck," a fireman yelled. Easily picking her up, Ford carried her across the street. She tried protesting, but her voice was raspy, and her lungs were still heavy with smoke, so the words came out garbled. "Shh, it's okay, Megan. I won't hurt you." Her eyes opened, and the bright green he'd seen earlier hadn't dimmed, though the whites of her eyes were now reddened from the smoke. Their eyes locked, and he saw when she'd finally stopped wrestling with herself as her features relaxed. Then he noticed his heart raced just a bit faster as he looked into those green eyes. Her tongue swiped across her bottom lip, leaving a glossy path, and he shook his head to clear it of sensual thoughts, which wasn't easy with her soft body pressed against his. He laid her on the ground, and seconds later an ambulance pulled to the curb directly in front of them. 2 paramedics came to their side. One immediately began pulling items from a bag, and the other shined a light into her pupils to see them dilate.
Megan, are you all right? Besides the smoke you inhaled, did you hit your head or hurt yourself in any way?
She nodded, coughed a bit more, and rasped out,
I think I hit my head on the floor when the explosion happened. Knocked out a bit.
More coughing. One of the attendants covered her nose and mouth with an oxygen mask and said,
Okay, just relax and take in this oxygen to help you breathe.
A blood pressure cuff was placed on her arm while the other attendant listened to her lungs, asking her to breathe in and out slowly so she didn't make herself cough. Unable to look away, he watched her as she complied with every request they made of her. Breathe in and out. Look up. Show me where you hit your head. On and without a peep of complaint.
Meg, do you want me to call Delaney or Cord?
She shook her head no, the mask still covering her mouth.
You sure? They'll be pissed if they find out you didn't call. Cord especially.
She shook her head again, and Ford wondered who Delaney and Cord were. No mention of them in her file. The 2 attendants then turned to him.
You all right, mister?
He nodded. Yes, I'm fine.
You have blood on your arm. I'd like to take a look at it if you don't mind.
Glancing down at the blood that had dribbled down his forearm, his brow furrowed. He hadn't noticed that at all. He'd been so wrapped up in Megan. Nodding at the attendant, he held his arm out and only winced once when he applied something to the cut that stung, then quickly bandaged it.
Not too deep, but keep it clean and covered for a couple of days.
Thanks. Glancing back to Megan, she'd sat up and watched as they bandaged his arm.
Megan, you want to go to the hospital for a checkup?
No.
Clearing her throat, she looked at the attendant.
Thanks, Jason. Tell Susanna I said hello.
Will do, Meg. You make sure to call Cord so I don't get an ass chewing next time he comes home.
That made her smile.
I'll call him. Now go on home.
The 2 attendants packed up their supplies and spoke to one of the firefighters and a cop before they took off. As the ambulance pulled away, the look on Megan's face was pitiful indeed. She looked at her house across the street, now soot-stained and blackened, water still raining in through the windows in the kitchen on both sides from the firemen's hoses. The tear stains were difficult to hide as they cleaned a trail down her soot-dirtied cheeks. She swallowed hard as she smudged the dampness from her face, seemingly trying to comprehend what had just happened. And damn it, his heart hurt for her. Kneeling down next to her, he swiped her hair back from her cheek, enjoying the softness of it between his fingers. Where can I take you tonight? Do you have a place to stay? Turning her head to him, her brows furrowed for a moment. Then she frowned.
I guess I can call my friend Jolie and see if she can let me sleep on her sofa tonight.
He pulled his phone from his back pocket and handed it to her. Give her a call, and I'll take you there.
I need to get some things from inside.
He shook his head. You won't be allowed inside tonight, Megan. They need to put the fire out, and then they'll need to do an investigation to see what started it. Did you hear anything prior to the explosion? Her brows furrowed slightly as she tried remembering.
I heard clicking or tapping, like something small fell and bounced on the floor. I was going in to investigate what that sound was, but the explosion happened and threw me back into the living room.
Okay. He squeezed her shoulder. They'll figure it out. Give your friend a call. He stood to give her some privacy, but she stopped him.
Where are you going?
She almost sounded panicked. Nowhere, hon. I'll be right here. His heart thudded in his chest as he watched her. Spoke to her. She truly seemed like a woman caught up in the middle of something she had no part in creating. Nodding, she swiped the screen on his phone, saw that it needed a password, and held it out to him with a small, trembling smile. He touched his forefinger to the button on the bottom, and it opened up. He watched her shaky fingers dial her friend's number and then swallow before putting the phone to her ear. Her lips quivered as she said, "Julie?" Voice cracking, she swallowed again, gaining her composure. "My house burned down. Can I stay at your house tonight?" More tears followed the former trails, and she angrily swiped them. He tuned out, but stayed close as he took in the sight of the house. It wouldn't be habitable for a long time, and if this was arson, she wasn't safe here. His gut told him it was, and his gut was seldom wrong. His gut also told him only 2 people would have tried to kill Megan. Marcus seemed to be getting bolder, and Bobby Ray Jr. was known for setting fires and killing people, especially if he thought Megan had talked to Marcus about something. Bobby Ray would certainly know that Wayland took something he wasn't supposed to have, and both men were running from the law and other unsavory characters. The only one they knew of for sure being Marcus. 2 dangerous, scared men on the loose was never a good thing, and Megan knew both men. So the question of the day was, how well did she know them now, and why would they want her dead?